Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today virtually. We are so excited to see so many faces on the screen and to connect with so many alumni, parents, and friends of the college from all different vintages. We so appreciate you making the time today. We are so thrilled to have Mary Abbajay, class of 1986, author of the best-selling book, Managing Up: How to Move Up, Win at Work, and Succeed with Any Type of Boss. Mary is the president of Career Stone Group, LLC, a full-service organization and leadership development consultancy that delivers leading-edge talent and organizational development solutions to businesses and the government. She is also has done numerous television and radio appearances. She hosts a weekly workplace advice podcast, Cubicle Confidential, and can be found on LinkedIn sharing much of her wisdom as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Mary, and we look forward to learning together.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Hello, my fellow Kenyanites, or lords and ladies, if you will. My name is Mary Abbajay, and I'm super excited for today's session on how to manage up, move up, win at work, and succeed with any type of boss. In this hour, we are going to talk about what managing up is. We're going to talk about what it isn't. We're going to talk about why you need to do it. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how you can do it. And so for those, some of you are managing up, some of you are managing down, some of you are doing both, some of you are managing across. So this is going to be a super fun interactive session. It's going to be really fast because I talk fast and I have a lot to share, and it's going to be interactive. So in the chat box, everybody say hello and tell us what class you're in. I'm class of 86. That was last century, 1986, not 1886, but last century. So say hello and tell us what class you are in. We're also going to launch a poll, so you can do two things at once. And the first poll is, do you manage other people? Yes, no, or sometimes. And as you're thinking about this, for those of you who are, of course, we all have to manage up because we all have bosses, but many of you have to manage down. So what I want you to think about for those of you who manage others is this: not only how do you keep managing up for your success, but how easy are you making it for your team to manage up to you? And hopefully this will give you some ideas for this day. Oh, look who we got here. We got some 2012. Oh, Darren is a parent of 23. Katie Cannon from 2004. Love it. Class of 2020. Robin Goodstein, class of 1987. I know Robin Goodstein. Robin Goodstein as my sister's best friends, who is also class of 1987. All right, well, welcome. So as we talk today, I'm going to play the expert here on your Zoom TV, but please know I am only the expert in my own mind. You are the experts in your own fields. You are the experts in your own organizations, and you are the expert in your own leadership journey. So please bring your wisdoms, your ideas, your thoughts to bear with us on the session today. Share in the chat box. Your little piece of nugget knowledge may be something that someone else absolutely needs. All right, so let's check out our poll. Look at this. 54% of you do manage other people. Excellent. And by the way, condolences, because managing people is hard. 14% of you do not, and 32% of you do sometimes. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of something for everybody here in this session. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of get started, and let me share my slides with you. All right, so the first thing we need to know when we think about managing up is this. The workplace is a social system. And what I mean by this is that in a social system, we have to work together. So your relationships are going to matter. All of your relationships will matter. The relationships with your colleagues, your team members, they are important ones. The relationships with your staff, the people that report to you, super important relationships. The relationships with your external stakeholders, your clients, your customers, these are very important relationships. And perhaps one of the most important relationships that you're going to have for your career success is the relationship that you have with your boss or your manager. And this is what we mean by managing up. We're talking about managing that relationship, managing the relationship with someone who has power over you, some higher up in the organization, so that you can succeed, they can succeed, and the organization can succeed. It's a three for people. It's not, contrary to some misguided notions out there, managing up is not about sucking up. It's not about being a sycophant. or being a patsy or kissing someone's behind, that's manipulation. When we're talking about managing up, we're talking about making a conscious and deliberative effort to build a productive, robust, and positive relationship with someone who has a different level of power than you do, someone that may have a different personality, different perspectives, different experiences, different priorities. And we're building this relationship so that we can succeed, they can succeed, and the organization can succeed. That is what managing up is. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we need to manage up. First of all, as I just said, your boss matters. Whether we like it or not, our bosses have a lot of influence over our career trajectory. They have a lot of influence over the types of projects we work on. They have a lot of influence over the types of teams we're a part of, and they have a lot of influence over our own career journey. They influence what kind of opportunities come our way. So when we have these good, productive, and positive relationships with our bosses, then good things are going to come our way in our career. But when we don't have these good relationships, then opportunities might pass us by and our career may languish a little bit. Which brings me to the second reason why we really need to manage up. And that is because your career matters. Nobody can, nobody should, nobody will care about your career more than you do. And if part of your career success, however you define success, hinges in some small or large part on having a good, productive, and positive relationship with your boss, then it's really on us to make that happen. Because the third main reason we have to manage up is, as much as we wish it weren't true, we cannot control other people. We can't change who they are. Your boss probably got to where he, she, or they are based on who she or they are. So we want to be clear that our power lies in our ability to figure out how to create adaptive strategies to work well with that person. Now, the thing is, and this sounds really easy, but the challenge is that most of us kind of like the way we operate. If you like the way you operate, people, give me a chat in the chat box. Who likes the way they operate? I know I do. It's why I do the things the way I do things the way I do things every day. It's easy for me. And when we're asked to operate out of our preference zone, we can get a little annoyed. We can get a little resistant. We might get a little judgy. I'm sure you have noticed by now that I talk kind of fast. It's easy for me. It works for me. But sometimes, believe it or not, people don't like my fast talking and they ask me to slow down. And while I understand that request, truthfully, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, why can't you just listen faster? If you could just listen faster, then I wouldn't have to change anything about myself. So when we are dealing with other people, we have to realize that our power lies in our ability to flex and adapt and figure out how to interact well with them. Now, we can always, and we should, make requests of other people. We can make requests to our bosses about how we would prefer them to interact with us, but we have no control over whether or not they'll honor that request. So we can't change others. Our power lies in our ability to figure out how to work well with the other person and do what's necessary. Now, there's a couple of other reasons or dynamics at play here in our need to manage up. And one of them is, truthfully, bosses aren't always very good at being bosses. 75% of US workers say that their boss is the worst part of their day. If you've ever had a boss who was the worst part of your day, let us know in the chat box. I know I have. I know that's why I own my own company. I worked for too many jerks. And finally, I thought, you know what? I can be my own jerk. I'm good at doing that. I can do that for myself. So the truth is, some bosses just aren't good at being bosses. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people. They're just not good in that role. We know that poor managers and poor relationships with managers are one of the top reasons why people still leave organizations. That old adage, you don't leave the job, you leave the boss, is alive and well in the American workforce. And we know that poor managers are one of the reasons that we have low employee engagement. So that's always going to be a challenge. And the other thing that happens in organizational life is that most organizations still promote people based on their technical skills, their ability to do well at their individual job. For example, you're a great salesperson. So congratulations, Michael Scott, you're now head of Dunder Mifflin. Or you are so good with spreadsheets, you can add so well, we're going to make you chief financial officer. Or, oh my goodness, you have the gift for gab, you're going to be our new development officer. And we promote these people based on their ability to perform in a job function without really knowing whether they have the aptitude or the acumen to be a people manager. And then what happens is that we don't train people how to be managers until after they've been a manager for many years. That little college called Harvard did a study recently where they discovered that most people get their first taste of being a manager somewhere in their late 20s, early 30s. But these same people didn't get any significant training on how to do the job until their late 30s or early 40s. So they had 10 years of just kind of winging it. Now, some people can wing it really well, others not so much. And then the last thing that's really kind of bubbling up right now is that few managers, not only were they not trained how to be managers, but very, very few of them were ever trained how to do this in a remote or a hybrid situation. So given this, that the odds of you having a boss who isn't perfect, a boss who isn't, as I call the unicorn boss, might be pretty high, at least once in your career. Kim's going to go ahead and launch the next poll. So you're going to have a spectrum of experience. On the one hand, you might have a boss who is super duper easy to work with. This boss is like a unicorn. You are completely in sync. Oh no, that's the wrong poll. Hold on. Let me get this right, poll. We should do, I would do poll 2. There we go. All right. Really super easy to work with. It's like bluebirds bring you coffee every day. It's so awesome. But on the other end of the spectrum, you might have a boss that makes your life a total living nightmare. This is the screamer, the shouter. This is the abusive boss. This is the narcissist, the bully. And this boss, we call these toxic bosses. When you have this boss, there's not a lot you can really do to manage up. What you're going to do here is manage yourself, protect yourself until you can get out. And we'll talk about this character in the middle. At the end. But in the middle of the spectrum, you're going to have bosses who are kind of difficult, mostly difficult, or really difficult, but not toxic. And this is where the art and the heart of managing up lies. How do you navigate these people who are semi to really difficult to work with? And we're going to talk through a whole bunch of strategies that will help you figure this out. All right, so let's end this poll and see what we got here. Oh, yay. Most of you have bosses that are really easy to work with. I love that. 37% have bosses who are usually, 24% of you have difficult bosses, or sometimes difficult, 5% really difficult, and oh my God, one of you has a nightmare boss. Okay, hopefully we're going to help you deal with that nightmare boss the best that we can. All right, so that's the why we need to manage up, and that's the what managing up is, to really deal with all kinds of personalities. Now, the how of managing up is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, in fact, but like many simple things, it's not always easy. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to really pay attention to the other person's style. Really pay attention and notice how your boss prefers to operate. And you're going to look for things like their work styles, their preferences, their priorities, their pet peeves. And when you do this, I want you to really resist the urge to judge them. Because when we start judging people, especially if we judge them negatively, we tend to then form a mental model of that person. And then your brain is only going to select the bad bits about that person. And if you really find that person difficult, you're going to risk being trapped by your amygdala, your reptile brain, your fight or flight brain. And when you get trapped in that ultra judgy resistant place, your frontal cortex doesn't operate very well. Your executive function decreases. So you want to make sure that you stay kind of above the fray. Just notice their behaviors, notice their patterns, don't judge them. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to take a look at who you are. How do you operate? What are your preferences? What are your personality types? What are your priorities? What are your pet peeves? And I don't want you to judge yourself either, but I do want you to be honest with yourself. What is it like to work with you? How do other people experience you? Now, once you have a good sense of who your boss is, who they really are, not who they should be, and who you really are, not who you think you are, then you're going to assess the gap. And in that gap is where you're going to choose in what ways you can adapt. What might you do a little more of, a little less of, a little differently to align yourself better with this person. You could also in that gap decide, what are the requests I need to make in order to work well with that person? And quite frankly, I don't care what you choose. I don't care if you choose to do nothing different. I don't care if you choose to request. I don't care if you choose to adapt. What I care about is that you choose. All too often when we find ourselves in a difficult situation or with difficult relationships, we tend to just put blame on the other person. That person should do that. That person should do that. And we tend to just point fingers at what everybody else should do without taking a moment to think about what we should do. And what I call these people are career victims. And so I want you to think about, have you ever worked with a career victim? If you have, let us know in the chat box. That career victim is the person that points fingers at everybody else, but never thinks about what action they can take for themselves. So I want you to stay in choice, because when you're in choice, you become a career victor. When you actively choose your path, actively choose your reactions, your actions, your interactions, that puts you in a lot of control, and that gives you a lot of flexibility so that you can really navigate different people and different personality types. So that's the how to do it. Now, when we talk about other people, human beings are very complex. So putting together the puzzle of the person isn't quite as simple as going, what are their preferences? So I'm going to give you some areas to look at. And these are 6 areas that I think are a good place to start. Now, the first one is going to be communication preferences. Communication is the lifeblood of organizational life. It's the lifeblood of relationships. In fact, many social psychologists will tell you that a relationship is nothing more than a series of conversations. So how you have those conversations, your level of communication is going to really influence how good or how strong that relationship is. So I want you to take a look at their preferences and your preferences. Are you introverts? Extroverts? Does your boss like to really verbalize stuff? Are they super loquacious, or are they more terse and succinct? Do they like a lot of communication or minimal communication? Do they prefer verbal communication, speaking with you orally, or do they prefer more written communication? So really pay attention to how your boss prefers to communicate and how you do. What's the gap? Where are you alike? Where are you different? What can you do to close that gap? The second area to look at is work styles. And work style is a really big area. And this can be very helpful if you do anything like any personality assessments like the DISC or the predictive index or the Myers-Briggs, or any of these can be really helpful to understand how people operate. So take a look at a couple of things like, are they collaborative? Meaning they like to work with you. They want to join you in projects. Maybe they're overly collaborative and they have their fingers in your pies all the time. Or are they more independent and they're going to be working more on their own and they want you to work on your own? And maybe you'll meet in the middle occasionally. When it comes to decisions or change, are they cautious? Are they really want to like cross every T and dot every I? Or are they more innovative and more like, yeah, that sounds good, let's try it? Do they like a lot of detail? Do they like to get in the weeds? Or are they more big picture people, more headline picture? Really figure out how they work, how they operate, how they get their work done, and how you get your work done. How are you the same? How are you different? A third area to look at is we call time, orientation, and pace. And this is about a couple of things. One, it's about the speed at which they operate. Do they have a need for speed, or are they more patient? Are they impatient and want things to happen super fast, or are they willing to slow it down and take their time? To time orientation, I want you to look at things like punctuality. Are they punctual people? Are they super punctual people, as I call them, hyper punctual people? Or is punctuality just a concept to them? I don't know. Do we have any? I'm a hyper punctual person. Do we have any hyper punctual people on this call today? Give me a chat if you are. So as a hyper punctual person, if I say to someone on my team, we're going to meet at Starbucks at noon, I'm going to actually want to see them at 11:45. I'm not going to say that, but at noon, they're already late. I'm already stressing out. And so you want to know whether or not you are hyper punctual. They are. Joanna lives in Florida. We are theoretically punctual. Oh, I like that. I might steal that, the theoretical punctuality. Yeah. So you want to like figure out like what that punctuality thing is. And also in terms of time orientation, there's a lot of bosses that still, for God knows what reason, they still equate the number of hours I see your butt in that seat to your work ethic. So there's still a lot of bosses that manage what we call by input instead of output. Hopefully the pandemic has eased some of this, but you need to be aware when you're going back to the workplace or back into a hybrid. If your boss is one of those old school bosses that judge your work ethic by the number of hours they see you at work, it's a good thing to know. The fourth area that you want to look at is goals and motivations. And this is an area where, in my experience, people get really judgy about other people. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times I hear comments like, well, my boss, she just wants to get promoted. My boss, he's just trying to look good for his boss. Or my boss, they're just trying to make a name for themselves in the company. And I think big deal. Like, who cares? Don't you have goals? Don't you have priorities? Don't you have motivations? We can't judge what other people want, but you need to know what they want. And by the way, you don't have to agree with what they want. And I'm not even going to tell you that you have to help them achieve what they want, but you do need to know what matters to them, because that is going to be a very important driver in their behavior. The more we can understand what drives the other person, the better we can figure out a strategy to work well with them. And then, of course, the last area that you're going to want to look at is called concerns and climate. And this is really about organizational culture. This is really about understanding the ether in which you are swimming. All systems have cultures, and all these systems the system dynamics are going to have a lot of influence on how people behave in the system. So it's really important to keep your external antenna up. What does the culture of your organization reward? What does it encourage? Who gets promoted? Why? What does the culture not reward? What does it discourage? Who doesn't get promoted? Why? What does your boss's boss worry about? What does your boss's boss's boss worry about? What does the board of directors worry about? What's going on in your industry or your profession? What are they worried about? So the more that you can keep your antenna up for around these external environmental factors, the better off you're going to be able to assess and kind of be ready for any behavior that it causes in your boss. Jonathan says he grew up in a household where we said be there at 7 and we mean 8:30. Yeah. I love that. I would probably have died of a heart attack in your family. The stress of it would have taken me crazy, because my family said we'll be there at 7 and then we roll in at 6:30. People didn't like us either for that. So get to know these areas of your boss. And these are just a few areas. And at the end, I'm going to show you some questions where you can ask your boss these questions. But so this is how we piece together the person that is the puzzle that is the person. So what I'm really asking you to think about is how we're going to interact with others. And I know many of us were brought up with the golden rule. And the golden rule says, treat others as you would like to be treated. Now, that golden rule works really well when we all want to be treated the same, right? When we all have the same workplace preferences, that all have the same workplace priorities. But when we don't, you run the risk of alienating people who may operate differently than you do. So for example, in real life, I am an introvert. And as an introvert, I'm a pretty serious introvert. So as an introvert, I walk through the world like this. Blinders on, heads down. I'm walking around. I'm not saying hello. If I see you on the street, I'm going to cross over the street so I don't have to say hello to anybody. And it's not because I don't love you. That's my preferred way of being. So if I treated and so by the way, if you see me on the street, I don't want you to talk to me either. But if I treated everybody in the same way that I want to be treated, I would be alienating about half of the world. So what I invite you to think about is what we call the platinum rule. And the platinum rule says this: treat others as they want to be treated. So if I know, for example, that Robin on this call is an extrovert and likes a little chit chat, I'm going to chit chat with her for a few minutes, right? If I know that, let's say, Kim isn't a big extrovert, I'm not going to roll into her office and verbally vomit all over her every time I see her, because that's going to push her away. So the idea is to learn what works for other people so that we can adapt the way that we interact with them to bring them closer to us and not push them further away. That is what we're talking about here. So it's really about understanding your control of influence, your sphere of influence. The more that we can be flexible and adaptable with other people, our better chances of bringing a good, healthy relationship to the table. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but Mary, it's not authentic for me to do that. It's not authentic for me to change how I interact. And here's what I say to that. Authenticity isn't about being the exact same person using the exact same behaviors in every situation. Authenticity is about being consistent with your spirit, your values, and in some ways, your personality. It doesn't mean that you act exactly the same everywhere. For example, authentically, I have a very, very salty vocabulary. I am a truck driver that hopes to swear like a sailor someday, but it doesn't make me inauthentic if I resist dropping F-bombs when I'm speaking to clients or giving presentations. It makes me appropriate. So you want to bring who you are to the table, but you can also bring who you are in a way that is receptive and adaptable to other people. That is the really heart of managing up. All right, so we've talked about why we do it, we've talked about what it is, and we've talked about how. Now I'm going to run through some examples for you. I brought some boss types with me to this webinar, and we're going to explore how we work with them. And for this next piece, people, I'm really going to need you to give me some chats and do some polls because it'll be more fun that way. All right, so the first kind of personalities we're going to talk about are introverts and extroverts. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. Number one is introversion and extroversion is about source of energy. So we want to make sure that we're always working with someone's energy and not against it. When we drain people's energy or when people drain our energy, we know that we're going to avoid them like the plague. So you want to make sure that you are not the person draining your boss's energy. The second reason we're going to talk about introverts and extroverts is because introversion and extroversion often have a lot of influence over how we prefer to communicate. And since communication is the lifeblood of our relationships, we want to see if this can't be a window for us to be able to communicate well with people who may communicate differently than us. So we are going to start with the introverts. If you are an introvert, chat me in the chat box or chat us in the chat box. So introverts, as you know, get their energy from within. They are recharged by spending a lot of time in their own internal world, their own world of thoughts and ideas. Introverts have what we call a lower threshold for external stimulus. And external stimulus, of course, is other people. Introverts, which means introverts are not going to be walking around the office going, how you doing? How you doing? Hey, what's up? They're going to be sitting in their office, their open door office with the door closed. Instead of going into your office, they're going to send you, they could be sitting right next to you. And instead of talking to you, they're going to send you a text, right? Introverts also do a lot more internal processing, meaning they want to think about things longer before they're going to ask to speak about them. And of course, I should have said at the beginning, introversion, extroversion is of course a spectrum. It's based on the work of Jung. I know you all know who Jung is. So you have both in you, but a lot of people are going to lean one way or the other. We got some introverts. We got Leslie, Rhoda, Katie's 50-50. She's more of an introvert, but sometimes she gets energy from being around other people. I do too, Katie, usually when I'm drinking. Christina is an outgoing introvert, so people think I'm an extrovert. Yeah, so that's called a gregarious introvert, or as I say, a highly functioning introvert. Paul's a big is a big introvert. Torsten is 70-30. Yeah, so it's great to know Elizabeth is an introvert. So your introvert boss is going to be a little more inward focused, not reaching out a lot, lower external stimulus, thinks more contained. Highly functioning introvert, Stephanie Levy. I love it. Yeah, you know, it is a problem. People think that you're an extrovert because of the way you present yourself. I get that all the time. All right, so then on the other side of the spectrum, you may be dealing with an extrovert. Extroverts have what we call a higher threshold for external stimulus, which means that they can be engaged with people in the outer world for a much longer time before they need time alone to recharge. Do extroverts need time alone to recharge? Of course they do. They just don't need it as much or as frequently as the introvert does. So an extrovert boss probably is walking around the office saying hello. Extroverts readily share information, sometimes too much information. Extroverts also do this thing called external processing, which is they think out loud. Not only do they think out loud, they actually, and neuroscience has proved this, they actually think better when they think out loud, which, by the way, to most introverts is the craziest thing we've ever heard of. Why would you open your mouth if you don't know what you're going to say? But this actually helps extroverts think better. So extroverts are expressive. They think out loud. They get energy for interacting with other people. Now, whether you have an introvert or an extrovert for a boss, they both make great bosses. I'm going to show you some tips for interacting with them depending on their where they sit in the spectrum here. I got a couple of chats though. Mary Ross is an outgoing introvert. Stephanie says, no one ever guessed the extent to which I prefer plants and animals to humans. And Karen Rockwell says, I love the phrase highly functioning introvert. That's my gift to you, Karen. Take it, use it, enjoy it. All right. So let's talk about some strategies to work with the introverted boss. And so before we do, those of you who are introverts, in the chat box, give us some strategies that you wish people would use on you. In other words, how do you prefer people to interact with you, my introverts? What do you like? What are some tips you would give the extroverts on interacting well with an introvert? What are some of your tips? No spontaneous brainstorming sessions from two people. We hate the pop-ins, don't we? Reach out, communicate regularly, says Leslie. Elizabeth says, give us time to respond to questions. I love it. Stephanie says, at work, just give me the facts in a friendly way. And when I'm signaling we're done, please be on your way. That's like when you're closing the door in their face. Set a limit to the conversation, said Rhoda. Stephanie says, a closed door is your answer. Do not put a comma in where I put a period. Oh, these are fantastic. Tracy says, stay on task with facts and what do you need by when. And Melissa says, if you have a meeting to discuss something important, provide your talking points, what you want to discuss ahead of time. Oh my God, my lovely Kenya introverts, you just nailed it. So this is what's going to help introverts. First of all, don't pop in with them, like schedule time with them. And by the way, don't wait for them to reach out to you. If you're waiting for your introverted boss to reach out to you, you may be waiting for a really long time. So be proactive, schedule time with them. And by the way, we're going to cancel half those meetings, especially the ones in the afternoon when we're tired, but that's okay. Don't take it personally, just schedule another one. As you saw in the chat box, let your introvert know ahead of time what you want to talk about. Even if it's just a 5-minute heads up. Introverts like to do some internal processing before they're asked to speak about something. Send them a text and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to talk about XYZ? They will really appreciate that. If you want to know what your introverted boss is thinking, you're going to have to ask them. You're going to have to pull it out of them a little bit. It's not that introverts don't want to share. It's just that it doesn't occur to them necessarily to share the information. And then once you ask them what their thoughts are, you're going to need to give them time to respond. So that means for my raging extroverts, you're going to need to shut the pie hole for like 8 seconds. Give them some silence, give them some space to respond. Email and text is a great way to get their attention. If you are working remotely, don't let them disappear. We know from the studies of pandemic work that the introverts kind of liked it and they may have ghosted you a little bit. And then finally, if you are a raging extrovert and you know who you are, I want you to remember the acronym WAIT. And WAIT stands for why am I talking? If you are simply talking to fill up the space, then I implore you, I beg you, I plead with you to please stop. All that excessive chit-chatting is not pulling your introverted person closer to you, it is pushing them away. Introverts like the silence. Silence is a beautiful thing. They are comfortable in it. So let it be there. Right before the pandemic hit, I was doing one of my last like in-person sessions with this was for this big global financial firm in Philly. And we had just finished this piece and this woman jumps up and goes, oh my God, I think I've been annoying my boss for the last 7 years. To which I said, oh my God, is your boss here? She goes, oh my God, he's right there. To which naturally I said, oh my God, has she been annoying you for 7 years? This man takes a deep breath. He looks down, he looks up and goes, dear God, yes. She was his executive assistant. She was a lovely person, a raging extrovert, and he was a pretty serious introvert. And so she would go into his office multiple times a day and just chit chat, just chit chat, just chit chat. So we found that he spent most of his day hiding from her. So once they figured, but he didn't say anything because he didn't want to hurt her feelings. So once they figured that out, I think they've had a pretty good relationship. All right, so let's check some of these chats out. Melissa says, if you have a meeting to discuss something, provide, oh, we already did that one. Stephanie says, sorry, people are going to think I'm awful. I just have so much to do. When I say yes, take the yes. Don't tell me why you needed it to ask in the first place. I said yes, take it and run with it. Stephanie, can you please talk to my husband? My husband does this to me and my team does this to me. I say yes, and they keep selling me. I say, stop selling me. I already said yes. I feel your pain. Stephanie loves the advice from Michael. Stephanie also says that, like I already tried before, people ask because I have about 4 fires I'm trying to figure out how to put out, like, outwardly, y'all. Give me the number. Husband does it too. All right, so great. So that's how we manage up introverts. Now, managing up extroverts is kind of the opposite. So when you're, before I go into this, my extroverts, what is it that you want from other people? Give us some tips and strategies to interact and work well with you. What works for you as an extrovert? How do you want us to interact with you? What works for my lovely extroverts? And I am an extrovert wannabe. Jonathan says, reflect the energy that I'm demonstrating. Yeah, I love that. Other extroverts, what works for you? Well, while you're extroverting your thoughts, here we go. Recognize that, Johanna says, recognize that I think out loud. So not everything I say is a command. It could be a thought. Oh, I love that, Joanna. And that's a big challenge that introverts have with extroverts is they have a hard time separating what's just a brainstorm and what's like a do out or a task. All right, so extroverts, keep it coming. Michael says, I don't want to always be the one to decide. Why must it always be my idea? I love that. All right, so if you're going to work with an extrovert, you do need to be available to engage with them. As we heard from Jonathan, you want to be able to engage with that energy, reflect that energy, speak up, build some rapport with them. Extroverts really do want to get a sense of your energy. So please engage with them. Let them know who you are. Really speak up when you are dealing with them. Your thoughts don't have to be perfect when you're with an extrovert. In fact, the extrovert probably prefers they're not perfect so they can build on them. Get comfortable like speaking up with an extrovert. Extroverts can oftentimes they can misunderstand silence. So don't sit there like this because you have nothing to say. Say something like, I agree, or that sounds good. Show that you are engaged in the conversation. Definitely provide opportunities for human interaction. Remember, that's what energizes your extrovert. Please, 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 please welcome and invite their brainstorming. Be that good sounding board. Be that person that helps them think through their ideas. Always, always make sure that you recap at the end of the conversation to make sure you're on the same page. As we saw in one of the chats that it was from Joanna, it might be a thinking out loud. So make sure at the end of a conversation with Joanna, you say, hey, Joanna, I think this is where we ended up, A, B, and C. Is that correct? While you're working remotely, make sure that you are really engaging in as many video or phone calls as possible. Anything that is more socially close conversation or communication is going to work well with the extrovert. Don't let them, they may feel socially isolated much more quickly. So you want to make sure that you are not leaving them out there in the ether all by themselves. And for my, Mary says, please respond. Don't look at me like I'm crazy. Yeah, that no response, that silence is going to drive that extrovert cray. Don't do that. Jonathan says, give me a clear indication that you've understood what I said, or else I'll keep reframing my thoughts until I feel like you did. I love that. All right. So my extroverts, here's a question for you. And you can put the answer in the chat box. How long does a 10-minute extrovert conversation take? 20 to 30 minutes, 20 minutes. Yeah. So if you're an extrovert working for an extrovert, you are still going to want to manage that social interaction a little bit, especially if your boss is a raging extrovert. Otherwise, a 5-minute conversation is going to take you 20 minutes. 70 says 75 minutes. So you can manage your time. Oh, and I think we have a poll. So thinking about this, Kim, why don't you go ahead and launch that poll? I think it's number 3 around what is your situation? Are you are you introvert or extrovert? We're both are you both introverts? Are you an introvert and your boss is an extrovert? Are you both extroverts? Are you an extrovert and your boss is an introvert, and you're not sure or no clear indication? And, I used to have an employee who was an extrovert and I was an introvert. And you guys probably, I don't know if you guys know this, but my sister, Stephanie Abbajay, and I, class of 87, we used to own this bar in Washington, D.C. called the Toledo Lounge. And so so we had a general manager and I was responsible for managing him. And so I would call him, and he was a lovely person. We'll call him John because that was his name. And so John was a raging extrovert. So I would call John every Monday. And as a bar owner, there are 3 things you want to know every Monday. How much money did we make? What broke? And who didn't show up for work? I would call John every Monday and I'd ask him this. I'd say, how was the weekend? And 30 minutes later, guess what I didn't know? Didn't know how much money we made, didn't know what broke, didn't know who didn't show up. But what did I know? I knew who came in the bar. I know who threw up. I knew like who went home with whom, like all of this stuff, because he was an extrovert. He just wanted to like talk. So what happened? I stopped calling him because I just didn't have the energy for these conversations. All right, so let's see what we have. So you want to really make sure that you are managing the energy and the communication if they are different. All right, so 31% of you are introverts. 36% of you are introverts working for an extrovert. 16% of you are both extroverts. 4% of you are extroverts working for an introvert, and 13% of you are unclear on the thing. So these are normal boss types. Oh, Lisa, I'm so glad you love Toledo Lounge. There you go. Well, then I'm talking about John, my brother-in-law. I couldn't fire him. All right. So these are normal bosses. Not that hard to figure out, but can be a little bit draining for us. Now we're going to talk about some difficult boss types. And these are bosses that are kind of universally annoying to everybody. And while there are dozens of difficult personality types, difficult dynamics, I'm only going to talk about 3 today, just to give you a sense of things that you can do or try when you're working with a difficult boss. Now, please notice this shark is smiling. So he's not going to eat you and destroy you, but he might take a good bite or a chunk out of your leg. And it might annoy you just enough so you're like frustrated, but these 3 bosses are totally survivable and totally thrivable. So the 3 we're going to talk about are the workaholic, the micromanager, and the impulsive. The workaholic, of course, is the boss who's always working. This is the boss who's there before you get there in the morning. They're there after you leave. They're texting you and emailing you at all hours of the day, night, and weekends. And it's like you're on this hamster wheel that you can't get off of. And it can be really stressful. The micromanager, which is the number 1 detested boss in the world, this is the boss who's always over your shoulder. This is the boss that gives you no autonomy. They nitpick everything you do. And it's like working for them is just a little bit soul crushing. And then, of course, you have the impulsive boss. And the impulsive boss is the boss that's always chasing shiny objects. This is the boss that's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. This is the boss that's always shifting the goalposts or adding new priorities or changing his, her, or their mind. And these bosses all can be a little difficult. Now, we have another poll for you, and this is which one of these bosses would be hardest for you to deal with? Because part of understanding how to navigate difficult bosses is to understand what's our rub, like what drives us cray cray. So for me, micromanager, I don't like it, but I know how to deal with them. So you know what? I've got my strategies. The workaholic, well, that's easy because I am one. So that's easy peasy lemon squeezy for me. The one that's really hardest for me would be the impulsive, because I'm a kind of person, I like to get things done. I have a to-do list. I want to check it off. I don't think life's a journey. I think it's a destination, and I kind of want to get there. So anyone who's pulling me off my course is going to drive me to distraction. All right. So we got in our poll. All right. Let me share this poll. All right. So Impulsive wins today, my people. Yeah. So 45% of you are most annoyed by impulsive, followed by the micromanager. And then, of course, 14% of you are the workaholic. So one of the things, we're going to talk about some strategies to deal with these characters. And one thing that we can do, because when we get with these dynamics, we often do get trapped by our amygdala. Like we get all wound around the axle. We get upset and frustrated. We've got to be able to work through that emotion to get to a calm and centered place so we can apply some strategies. So one thing to think about is, Katie says insecure micromanager is the worst. Yeah, it's terrible. All right. So I want you to think about, who might you be? And in other words, which one of these behaviors have you ever done as a boss, as a colleague, as a team member, as a spouse, as a friend? Which one of these behaviors have you done? Have you ever micromanaged anything before? Have you ever been a workaholic, or have you ever been impulsive? In the chat box, fess up, people, claim your shame. Which one of these have you done? I know I am always a workaholic. And sometimes, to much of my team's discomfort, I can turn into a micromanager or a nitpicker. And I think I'm impulsive occasionally, but I think the top two are some of the ones that I do. All right, we've got some. Abby's been a micromanager. Joanna's been a workaholic. Matt definitely has been impulsive. Katie's like, if she's honest, she's done all of them. Of course we have. Christina, workaholic. Torsten, workaholic. Kellen, micromanage. Michael's done workaholic without alcohol. Leslie is micromanaged. Stephanie says setting up healthy boundaries with a workaholic, which is an aspiration of mine, is why this type is tough for me. I get that. It is hard. And Karen says, I can often be a micromanager and often a workaholic. Yeah. And you're not terrible people, right? You're good people, but sometimes your management style or your interaction, your work style can be a little challenging for other people. So we're going to talk about some strategies for a micromanager. So if you've ever micromanaged, even for like 5 minutes, in the chat box, give us some ideas of what would have worked for you. What would make you stop micromanaging? I'm going to go ahead and give you some of mine. One is, if you're faced with a micromanager, don't take it personally. It may not be about you. It may be about them. Their need for certainty, they have a higher threshold for building trust. Now, if you're the only person on your team who's being micromanaged, then I suggest you take it very personally, because there's something that you're not doing. There's something that you're not giving them that they need. Micromanagers often have a higher need for certainty and a higher threshold of trust building. So they're going to need more information, more inclusion, and a little bit more control until they build up enough trust with you, either as a person or as a project, or on that project, to let go of the reins. Matt Willis says setting up a clear plan roadmap. Absolutely, that works. Stephanie says micromanage me back. They'll knock it out real fast. Oh, Stephanie, you're funny. So you want to be really proactive with the micromanager, which means, offer regular updates, status reports proactively. Give them your game plan proactively. If you're working for a micromanager and they're asking you how a project's going, you're probably already behind the 8 ball. You got to flood them with information, over communicate. Anticipate their involvement. This is why I love the idea from Matt about setting up a clear plan or roadmap, because you're going to want to know at the front end of a project what their peccadillos are, what their nitpicks are, like what's important to them. And you're going to want to show them how you're going to accomplish their goals. It is going to take extra effort on your part, extra information. You're going to hate every second of it. It's not fair. It's not right. But until they feel they have enough information, enough inclusion, enough sense of control, they are not going to let go of the reins. The more you resist their need for certainty, the tighter they hang on, and they won't give you your autonomy. So you really got to figure out what it is they want and be proactively giving it to them. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, a micromanager will let go of those reins once they have trust in you. So you've got to prove yourself. Again, not fair, not right, but what are you going to do? It is who that person is. Lisa said, yes, control and probably tolerance for ambiguity. Absolutely. Jonathan says, could you repeat that idea? A higher need of X and a higher threshold of trust building. A higher need for certainty. Certainty is a neuropsychological need, which means I need to know what's going to happen. And when we don't have that need for certainty, we get trapped by our amygdala. By the way, autonomy is also a neuropsychological need for human beings. And that's why when someone's certainty rubs up against need for certainty, rubs up against your need for autonomy, that's why we get so upset about micromanaging. So you've got to give them certainty and you've got to build trust. All right, so the workaholic. So my workaholics, give us some strategies to deal with you. Couple of things on the workaholic is, first of all, you do need to be clear about boundaries and requests. Boundaries are your boundaries. When are you willing and not willing to work after work hours? And you want to be clear and transparent, but you want to also be very tactful. You also want to be clear about a workaholic's requests. Just because a workaholic is sending you emails and texts at all hours doesn't necessarily mean they expect you to do anything about it right there. They may just be putting that stuff on your radar, in your queue, if you will, for you to take care of the next day. And yes, I know we shouldn't do that. The workaholic should control ourselves not to email people after hours. But again, we can't control that other person. We can only request. So be really clear what they mean by those after-hour requests. You also want to make sure that when you are working with a workaholic, that you're keeping them in the loop on your projects. Workaholics care about getting work done. They care about high levels of productivity. So you want to really dazzle them with your productivity all the time. Don't assume they know what you've accomplished. Make sure you tell them and they know all the projects that you're working on and the status of them. You are going to need to bring your A game every single day with a workaholic because that's what they care about, getting a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of slack days when you deal with a workaholic. And then, of course, you might consider going the extra mile on occasion. Even if your workaholic boss says, no, 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 I don't expect you to work on weekends. No, 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 I don't expect you to work after hours. Whenever you do give a little bit of extra effort, they will always appreciate it. Now, you have to stay in control of that extra effort because it could be a slippery slope. So make sure if you do give an extra effort or you do give them an extra day here or there, or an extra hour here or there, you make sure you let them know that this is just, for this project, I will do this. Keep your boundaries as intact as you can. And my last thing about workaholics is you got to know before you say yes to the dress. Like you should know whether or not you've just said yes to work for a workaholic. Most workaholics are pretty honest about their work habits. So make sure that you know what you're getting into before you work for a workaholic. Stephanie says, it's okay to set boundaries with me as a workaholic. I need to take this time for my well-being and my long-term productivity. I love this. I love that you add that, Stephanie. This email was sent at a time is most convenient for me. Please respond at a time that's most convenient for you. I am going to steal that one. Michael says, the extrovert workaholic's favorite phrase, FYI, translation, what will you do about that? I love that. All right, so let's say you're working for an impulsive. Couple of things about the impulsive. One is whether you like it or not, your job is going to be to take all that cray frantic energy and mold it into something that is doable and something that is feasible. This is best done as a team. It's a better team sport than individual sport. So a couple of tips here. One, see if you can't embrace something about their ideas. In other words, don't be a complete wet blanket, the Debbie Downer, the negative Neil naysayer. Find something in that idea that you can latch onto, the germ, the kernel. What is it they're trying to accomplish? Use the yes and with them. And the yes and says, oh, that's an interesting idea. And where does this fall on our list of priorities? Oh, I'd love to think about how we could do that. And which resources do you want to pull from another project? That could be really helpful for us. And here's some challenges that we'll have implementing that. And here's some things that we could do differently in order to make something like that happen. So you're going to try to mold it. You're going to make them prioritize. You're going to ask them what resources they want to pull. And you're going to give them some alternatives that try to get them something. So don't be but be the, interesting. How can we make this happen? So those are some ideas. The last idea for you on the impulsive is to hedge your bets. And by hedging your bets, basically what you're doing is you're going to wait to see if it really is going to stick. So I have a lot of people that work for impulsives that tell me what they do is they wait till their boss asks them 3 times. And the third time they think it's going to stick. You've got to really know who your boss is to hedge your bets, but it's always an option to think about. All right. So Stephanie says, and that signature is serious to Cambridge Leadership Institute called STEM faculty. I love it. Impulsive. Stephanie, you are on fire. I wish I could read all your stuff. All right. So these are difficult bosses. Now, I'm going to briefly run over hybrids. I want to talk about toxic. The key for the hybrid is you're going to want to meet, for those of you going hybrid, you want to really make sure you take time to meet with your boss to plan for success. Don't just rely on whatever the company policy is. You want to make sure that you are digging into the granularity of what it's going to look like in practice. And this is a great time actually to have these conversations with your boss. What are her, or their expectations, needs, and wants? What are yours in terms of communication, collaboration, connection? And as you're going into hybrid, one more big tip for you is stay visible. And I mean physically visible. When you go into the physical office, make sure that you are taking time to actually see your boss, meet with your colleagues. What's going to happen is oftentimes those people who are in the office get opportunities over those who are not in the office. It's called presence bias. We want to make sure that you are strategic and thoughtful about showing your face to your boss and your colleagues and your boss's boss. So make sure when you go into the physical office that you're not just going in there, shutting your door and working alone. Part of your time in the physical office is going to be about socializing and building your relationships. Now, did that really fast. I got 5 more minutes. I'm going to talk about the truly terrible. These are the toxic bosses. These are your screamers, your shouters, your bullies, your narcissists. I don't know. I think we have a poll, Kim, on if you've ever worked for a toxic boss. These are people whose style is about degrading, about humiliating. These are people on power trips. These are people that will make your life a total living nightmare. If you've ever worked for a toxic boss, please let us know in the chat. There are 3 main things I want you to know if you find yourself working for a toxic boss. Number 1 is it will make you sick. Literally, study after study shows that working for toxic bosses or a toxic culture increases your chance of cardiac disease, stroke, and diabetes by upwards of 60%. We know that working in a toxic culture decimates your immune system. It decimates you physically, emotional, and psychologically. It will make you much more susceptible to colds, flus, COVID, all kinds of viruses and diseases. We also know that the longer you stay, the longer it takes to recover. It can take up to 24 months to recover emotionally, physiologically, and psychologically from a toxic boss. So for those of you who have ever worked for a toxic boss that have left, let me know how long it took for you to recover. The mental health professionals compare this to post-traumatic stress syndrome, battered spouse syndrome, and Stockholm syndrome. And people who work for toxic bosses tend to stay there longer because their whole psychological makeup gets decimated. And the third thing I want you to know about is that if you're working for a toxic boss, nobody is coming to save you. HR isn't coming to save you. HR's role is usually to protect the company. And it's not because HR doesn't want to help you. They often don't have the power to help you. And often these toxic bosses sit at the top of the corporation, the top of the company. They're the leaders, or they are so good at manipulating their bosses that nobody knows what they're doing, or they're high performers and the company won't get rid of them. Yeah. So Katie says, took her years before she stopped having nightmares. Stephanie says trauma is honestly still there. It's still recovering. Pandemic didn't help, almost 2 years. Yeah. So know that it's normal to take a while to recover. Also know, people, that nobody ever regretted leaving a toxic boss too soon. So if you are working for a toxic boss right now, get out. But until you do, here are 5 quick ideas for you to think about. And I know some of you have the book. I go into much more detail in the book. Number 1, you have to protect your mental health. You have to protect yourself from their poisonous arrows. Because think about putting like a golden shield around your whole entire soul and psyche. Do not let their poison into you. Separate yourself from their behavior. It's not about you, it's about them. Do whatever Jedi mind tricks you need on yourself not to internalize their poison. Number 2, activate a support network. You are going to need people around you to keep you whole, to keep you sane, to keep you psychologically healthy. Make sure you have people around you that can support you. Maybe you're going to hire a coach or a therapist, or it's just going to be your friends and family, but make sure you have support to keep you healthy so you can get out. Do what you can to minimize direct contact. And I mean this literally. Lay low, stay out of the line of fire. Really minimize any direct contact you have to have with this person. Start exploring opportunities, maybe within your organization, maybe outside of your organization. Start thinking about where you can put yourself to its next best use, because knowing that your chance of thriving with this boss are pretty slim. And then, of course, just get out, save yourself. Sometimes you have to realize your best course of action is to find a new place to work. There's nothing wrong with that. I love this quote by W.C. Fields. Sometimes quitting is the best option. Sometimes you need to grit, and sometimes you just need to quit. And by the way, even if your boss isn't toxic, sometimes the relationship just doesn't work. So always be prepared to think about, where can I really thrive? Am I thriving here? And what can I do to help myself get myself in a position where I can thrive? Now, I'm going to go to a couple minutes over, a couple quick things about for you who are bosses. One, how are you helping people manage up to you? Are you making it easy for them? Two, don't be a difficult boss. Know your team, do some adapting to them. It shouldn't be a one-way street. Be clear with your team about your expectations, your preferences, your priorities, your pet peeves. Stay connected, trust your people. Don't micromanage them. Provide frequent feedback and developmental conversations with them. Communicate, and most of all, just be a human being, for goodness sake, which means leading with heart, leading with empathy, leading with a little bit of love. Now, to close up, none of this has to be a mystery. What you can do, by Abby, what you can do is have the conversation. Set a meeting with your boss right now. Find out about their preferences, their priorities, their pet peeves. What can you do more of, less of, or differently to work with them? I just did this presentation on Tuesday for Microsoft last Tuesday for Microsoft for their general counsel office. And they're like 100 lawyers on the call. And the chief guy said, we did this. And I said, hey, Hossein, how many of these people have ever had this conversation with you? And from the hundreds and hundreds of lawyers that worked with them, he said five. And those five are now like his key people. So go have this conversation with your boss. Here are some questions. And I will send anyone who wants to email me, I will send you the slide deck. What's your preferred mode of communication? What level of detail do you like? How often do you want to check in with me? What's your high priority items? What are the biggest pressures on you? What are your pet peeves? What can I do to be more helpful to you? What can I do more of, less of, or differently? These are great questions that you can ask. And the timing is perfect right now as we're kind of coming out of remote and we're going into hybrid, or maybe you're going back to the office. This is a great time to reconnect with your boss to figure out what is going on, how you, he, she, or they can work better together. So at the end of the day, it's your career, people. You spend more than a third of your waking hours at work. Those should be great hours, not terrible hours. And you have an opportunity when you manage your relationships, when you manage up, to manage your career. It's all about creating the best work-life experience that we can create. And so much of this is within our power if we are willing to take on the steps we need to take on, to have the conversations we need to have with others so that we can win, they can win, and of course the organization can win. So, can't believe I did that in an hour. That was a 90-minute presentation in 60. Thank you for letting me talk so fast at you. Don't forget to check out my podcast, cubicleconfidential.com. It's a weekly advice show where we answer listeners' questions and give them advice. So with that, here's my contact information. Reach out, email me, LinkedIn me, tweet me. Just don't call me, because as an introvert, I'm not going to answer the phone. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to Kim and say thank you all so much. I wish we were all together on Middle Path, but we're not. We're all in our little homes.
Thank you so much, Mary. I know I speak for everyone. I say this was such an action-packed hour, and there are so many things for all of us, no matter where we are in our careers, to take with us, whether it's managing up or thinking about how we are as supervisors too. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for making yourself accessible to the broader Kenyon community. And we're so thrilled to count you among our illustrious alumni. So for those of you who asked in the chat, this was recorded. We will post it on our website, on our alumni YouTube page, and we will email all of the registrants from this program. So all of you, and then all the folks who registered who weren't able to make it. So hopefully many others will learn from this as well. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Bye, everybody.